Hi, this is Eli Kranzberg from Production Expert. WavesFactory has just joined the crowded playing field of delay plugins with EchoCat. Is this going to be the delay plugin that'll finally allow you to get rid of all your others? Stay tuned and find out. EchoCat is a tape echo with 3 playback heads, and it's based on the WEM Copycat from 1958. So this is the main page. Pretty intuitive. We have input and output gain staging. We have a mix control and sustain, which is another word for feedback, how many times the delays are going to be fed back into itself. And then we have the 3 separate echoes that we can turn on or off. So right now, this whole unit is off, and I have just some half notes happening on a click. So let's put it in. We'll listen to the first echo. I'm going to turn the sustain down. And turn it off. We'll hear the second echo. And the third one. And all 3 together. Now, if we press on the heads page, this is where we control the parameters for each of the 3 echoes, and they're pretty intuitive. So tape head 1, we can set the time value. We can sync it to musical subdivisions, or when it's off, we can set it freely. So that's set to 16ths. Tape head 2 is set to 8ths, and that one's set to dotted 8ths. This is just a default setting. Of course, you can set them however you want. And for each head, we can control the volume independently, the panning, and even the high pass and low pass filtering. Let's turn these on. Now, when we press the tape page, here we're getting into some interesting variables. We can introduce tape hiss, which I'm personally not a fan of, but for those who like it, we can adjust the level of it, and we have an auto mute. So EchoCat will detect when there's no input signal present and mute it like it is now. So let me turn that off. We'll dial this up, and you can hear that hiss. And here you can force it into stereo or mono. So there it's always present, but with auto mute, it'll get turned off when there's no signal. I'm going to leave it off in general for my use. I'm not a fan of that, but it's there if you want it. Now, cateffacts, which is another word for artifacts, introduces different random variables that were present on tape machines. We have the wow and flutter, which are random pitch fluctuations caused by inconsistencies in the motor speed on the tape deck. And they're nice variables that add realism. Same thing with age and signal loss. So here the frequency response is altered by losing some high frequency content and gaining low frequency. And it introduces what's called asperity noises, which are noises caused by random imperfections on the surface of the tape. And same thing with signal loss. There's 2 different oscillators that are driven to remove or attenuate some of the high frequencies randomly. Now, in the old days, no tape loop was perfectly smooth. There were often gaps at the loop points, and this loop gap depth knob creates a momentary signal loss, and it's repeated by the tape heads. So we set the amount here just for some random loss at the loop points, or we can leave it all the way at 0 if we want it to be perfect. Now, next we get onto the motor page. We have hum. Again, we can introduce that, which I'm not a fan of personally, but you can toggle between 50 and 60 cycles per second, and we have auto mute so that it'll get muted or gated when there's signal present, or you can leave it off. Now, vary speed changes the speed of the motor so the times would vary on these tape heads. Now, in EchoCat, you can change the speed of the motor to get that kind of tape pitch effect. Or you can modulate it using the modulation controls. So the smoothing controls the time it takes for the motor to achieve the desired speed. So if we have it really quickly, we'll hear the pitch changes more quickly. Or we can modulate it here. This will set the amplitude of the LFO that controls the vary speed. So we can have it a deep modulation, a wide one, or not. And this controls the speed of the LFO. So it's very exaggerated there. And we can have this based on a triangle or sine wave for the LFO. And finally, there's a master page where we have ducking, and this is great. EchoCat will turn the volume of the wet signal down when the dry signal is present, and this knob sets how much reduction is applied. So they were missing out the first one. How quickly it'll act. So that can be very musical when it comes to vocals or other instruments that we're feeding through it. And we can work in stereo or mid-side mode. So for the output, we have control over the mid channel and the side channel here. We have global bass and treble and high pass and low pass filtering. And this is interesting. We can force a signal to mono or stereo, or what's interesting is fake stereo, where it applies a 5 millisecond delay to the right channel. So it creates the illusion of a wider sound. So those are the basic controls. Let's listen to it in action. Here I've got it on a Rhodes with a default setting. Let's look at a couple of different approaches. So we can go with a typical kind of tempo sync delay like this. You can pan the different delays. Just filter them all a bit differently. Let's turn off the hiss. We'll introduce some of the random variables. I like this loop gap to have random dropouts. Turn off the hum. And a little bit of pitch modulation. So that's nice without it. Let's try a slightly different approach. I'm going to put these two out of sync. Let's set this maybe a quarter note. So we have a pronounced delay here, and I can bring these down. Maybe they're panned. And go for more of the pitch modulation. So we're getting some detuning, which is really interesting, plus a tempo sync quarter note. So if I go back here, I can just bring these down a bit more in volume. So we get a thickening in pitch. It's really interesting. So there are two different approaches to tape delay with Echo Cat on Rhodes. Here I've got it on a lead vocal.
Unseen, you just ignore, delete, delete, delete. Some twisted social scenes, strange places where we meet.
So it's a really nice, interesting, thick tape, detuned quality. I've got the head set for very tight delays, 92 milliseconds, 62 and 154 with a bit of panning and filtering. And on here, I'm introducing a fair bit of artifacts, and I love this loop gap for some real randomized dropouts. And here I've got these dialed down, and I'm introducing some variation and modulation in the pitch. Since they're tight delays, it's really nice. And in the master, I'm using the ducking here. So I've got the sustained dialed up, but with this, it's not getting in the way.
No people anymore, just screens and
it's a bit messy.
Screens. Unseen, you just ignore, delete, delete, delete.
But there it pokes out.
Some twisted social scenes, strange places.
It gives it a nice thick quality.
And the nation makes it scream, takes it down, takes it down, takes it down, takes it down, takes it down. Oh.
So there are a couple of real-world examples of Echo Cat in action. Make sure to link back to the article in the notes below and get my final thoughts on Echo Cat from WavesFactory. This is Eli Kranzberg for Production Expert.